Mirajane Strauss is a character in Fairy Tail that I and many others believe is probably one of, if not the most underutilized character in the entirety of the series. With Mira being able to fight again during the Battle of Fairy Tail, and so on and so forth, we have seen her battle in practically every single arc in the series. However, depending on the arc, her role in it is either very big, with really cool fights that mean something to go on with the rest of the story and her character, or just feels like there's something else missing, to the point of her just not having anything big at all. And she has probably a very unique kit of abilities, especially for certain arcs, that feel like they would thrive with her as a leading character. Or at least someone to have more of a role in certain arcs. I'll get to the most obvious one later on, but Mira definitely deserves to have a lot more spotlight on her and more development as a character, because it feels like a lot of it is kind of subtle, while also not being properly shown to us in the story with how she progresses through fights and her interactions with some characters. And it is kind of a shame due to the fact that from the beginning of the story, she has always been there, supporting characters in the background until she finally got back to the front lines and started to actually take part in the plot with a more hands-on role, a la, beating the ever-living crap out of anybody that pisses her off. And that's kind of what I'm going to get into today. Before we jump into my thoughts on Mira and how she's been mishandled, don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell for updates on future videos. Really helps, and it shows you guys enjoy what I make here on the channel and shows you want to see more. This is a different type of video that I haven't really done in a good while, which is just a baseline discussion of my raw thoughts on Mira as a character. So let me know if you like this type of video going forward, and I'll probably do this for other characters, arcs, or parts of Fairy Tail. So let me know your thoughts about this. But anyway, let's just jump right into things. So when we first get introduced to Mira, she was nothing more than just a model for Source for Weekly, gaining extra attention to Fairy Tail, while also being the more, I'd say, emotional support or positive influence to other members of the guild, while also essentially basically being Makarov's right hand in terms of helping out with guild matters, giving out quests, handling the daily stuff at the guild, all that stuff. And that was perfectly fine to begin with until in Phantom Lord, we learned that she was an S-Class wizard, and we had no idea what was up with her no longer being an S-Class wizard. Something must have happened. And we've seen in flashback, even in Phantom Lord, that Mira was kind of more of a punk girl. She would basically tell off other people, she'd have more of an aggressive attitude, while also being somewhat playful with others in that degree, while also taking part in quests and having the nickname of the She-Demon, or the She-Devil, which is a really cool nickname. And so we learn in Phantom Lord, with Elfman's tragic backstory that he shares with Mira, at least in part to Mira, is the death, quote-unquote, of Lizana. We all know she ends up not being dead during Edalus, but that's besides the point. Mira shared trauma with Elfman, and thus, due to the absence of Lizana and the trauma of losing that really positive, upbeat figure in her life, as well as with the rest of the guild, dealing with that trauma, it seems that Mira did, in fact, take up more of an upbeat persona to the point where that basically became her default, while her more, I'll say edgier side, is not really edgy, but more so her more aggressive side is more so very deep down and only comes out when she's really, really angry in certain instances. We get glimpses of this, mainly when Loxus was being a dick, but these moments do happen from time to time, hinting at Mira's more temperamental side, which was really cool, because during the Battle of Fairy Tail, where she thought she was going to lose Elfman, her only other family member, her little brother, she snapped, and for the first time in years, unleashed her Satan soul for the first time and walloped Freed like nothing, showcasing just how strong she is. And from that point forward, almost every arc, not counting Rational Sace or Edalus obviously, but from Tenrou arc onward, minus Sun Village, Mira has played somewhat of a role or took part in specific battles in Fairy Tail going forward in basically almost every other arc in the series. And even in obvious filler or anime canon arcs like Key to the Starry Heavens, as well as the Eclipse Celestial Spirits arc. And depending on the arc, her role varies, but for the majority of the time, Mira does play a pretty significant role. First major one is definitely Tenrou Island, which is when she fights Ozma, with no real choice, as he basically threatens Lizana with a literal bomb to her chest in that instance, threatening to kill her, blow her up, if Mira doesn't fight and defeat him. And so Mira fights as much as she can, but realizes that she has obviously used up magic from her fight against Elfman and Evergreen before, but she's also fighting against the stress and constant thought of her mind that she's taking too long, and thus she decides to take the brunt of the blow from Lizana's bomb to save her life, instead of risking with the last couple of seconds to win the fight to potentially save her life, or do the more guaranteed version. That is a good showcasing of her character and her loving nature towards her siblings, as well as other characters that she finds dear. I do like that. However, the issue that I find with that after going back through it is mainly because from Daedalus to now, there has been no breaks. Lizana came back, and then we jumped straight to Tenrou Island, and I feel like we could have seen a bit more of Mira, just showcasing what she can do, as well as spending more time with her sister, who is now alive again, as far as she knows. And so I feel like this moment would have fit a bit harder if we spent a bit more time with the Strauss siblings with Lizana back. But that's just me. That could be something different, but it is somewhat of a trend that actually goes into the Lizana, which I'll talk about in a different video. But Mira didn't get a conclusion to this really big fight. Obviously it went towards Urza. And that I also don't have an issue with. I just wish Mira had more of a bigger role in this arc. She fought one of the stronger characters in the arc, but I do feel like she could have done a bit more. But it's fine. She hasn't been a combative in a long time, so it makes sense that despite her strength, she's still rusty. And then we see this going forward, going into the time skip with Key to the Starry Heavens. She unleashes a new takeover form and ends up beating Racer, which honestly gives a really good character moment to Mira about running away from the past and that there's nothing else chasing you when she talks to Racer. I found that as a good moment in retrospect once we learn about Mira's backstory. Obviously, I'm going to get into Mira's backstory once we get to Tartaros, but either way, Mira saying not to run away anymore and that there's nothing else chasing you does hit harder due to the fact that in her past with her and her siblings, they had to run away because people were chasing after them due to the events of their past. And a demon in Mira finding out she has takeover powers. And so I found that to be really good. Shows a bit more to the layers of Mira's character. Then we get to Grand Magic Games, which, unfortunately, Mira doesn't do all too much. She takes place in a bikini contest, which in the manga is just a chapter, just a bikini contest, then she turns into a new takeover form that at that point should be her strongest, wipes out her opponent in one blow, but in the anime just evolves into an entire basic fan service fest for the entirety of the episode. The anime adds a lot of stuff. But after that, Mira hasn't taken part in the Grand Magic Games. Instead, she goes to help Lucy get out of the jail that the kingdom put her in, due to circumstances alongside Natsu's help, along with Wendy and the Exceeds. She only fights this one girl that uses paper magic to use spells and poisons and stuff, and she has a really badass moment, but other than that, there's nothing else to add. It doesn't expand on her character, show more. She basically dominates once she actually starts to get serious, and then she does nothing for the rest of the Grand Magic Games going into the Dragon Kings Festival. She's kind of been forgotten about, which again is a real shame. Obviously, Dragon Festival, Dragon Slayers took the entirety of the plot outside of Ultir to have the main characters in that section to fight, which again makes sense. I just feel like we could have added something to at least the Hungry Wolf Knights in the prison break to give Mira a bit more to her character, to showcase the strong suits of who she is now from her trauma leading into getting her sister back and seeing how that has affected her as a character. Because other than letting out the demon a lot more often, in which case she's still virtually the exact same person. Not going to touch on the Zodiac Eclipse arc because again I find that to be probably the worst arc in Fairy Tail in terms of canon. And Mira fights Pisces. I get the connection of someone that loves her family so much taking on someone with a very dysfunctional family. That makes sense in terms of, I guess, theming for the fight, but she doesn't really do anything or teach a lesson or whatever. She just basically wins the fight. Unless I'm missing something, I wiped that entire arc from my memory for the most part, because outside of a few funny moments, it was awful. It was boring, and I did not like it. Tell me if there's anything in the comments, if that's the case, if I'm missing something from that arc. But moving on. And what made me the most disappointing, probably the one arc that everyone can collectively agree on, is where Mira was both mishandled and sidelined too much, is Tartaros. Now, in an arc all about demons, you would think that the girl with the demon powers would play a much bigger prominent role. And she does for a bit, and then we get a backstory for her, and then after one fight, she's out of the picture for good for the rest of the arc, and that ends up being kind of a shame. After everything with the Hell's Core taking over it, which is honestly a really sick and badass way to use her takeover powers to basically manipulate a living biolab that is connected through like these giant tendrils and shit like that, using her takeover magic to completely control the place and destroy the regeneration revival machines for Tartaros and the Demon Gates. Really awesome, really cool utilization of her powers. And we then get her backstory with the fact that her and her siblings lived alone, and there was a demon in their town, and so Mira went to face the demon, the only person brave enough to take it on. She somehow managed to get rid of the demon, but she had a demonic-looking arm. And thus, we realized she had demon takeover magic and potentially some demon DNA in her, potentially from ancestry, from all we know. But the town saw her as a demon now, and so they demonized her and her siblings, and so they had no choice but to run away. And they were on the run for a long time until they made it to Fairy Tail, and Mira was closed off for a while, similar to how Urza was to a degree, depressed, and didn't find a place in the world, to the point where she was gonna leave her siblings at Fairy Tail to be with the rest of the kids that were at the guild, because they would be happy, and she was gonna go off alone to not cause anybody trouble. This was something I feel like we should have seen a bit more of, especially from the beginning. It was hinted at the beginning of the series with Mira feeling useless now that she wasn't able to fight, but now she can fight again, and so I feel like we could have done a bit more to that. This adds a bit more to the beginning of Mira, at the very beginning, a bit more depth, showcasing that she felt like she was going to cause trouble for her siblings and make their lives difficult due to the nature of her magic and the demon arm she had. But after obvious sibling bonding and her siblings learning takeover magic to kind of make her feel better, eventually she gets rid of the demon arm and learns full force how her powers work, and she finds a place in Fairy Tail. Just embraces the inner side of her personality and just making a hell of a lot of friends and raising hell at the guild together. And that was something really cool. And then she fought Sayla. And Sayla was an interesting character for her to face, someone with the ability to force others to do her bidding, as we saw with Elfman playing on his trauma too, which I can actually get in a different video. But having that aside, Mira is fighting a demon tied to her siblings, causing them pain and suffering, based on, capturing Lizana, potentially subjecting her to humiliation and torture, and forcing Elfman to blow up the guild and kill all of their friends. So, yeah, she's fighting an evil piece of shit in this instance, but she's on the back foot. Downside, she's only using one of her takeover forms. We know she has two others, which would have been really cool to see, because I feel like in a fight against a demon, Mira should be using more than her baseline State and Soul form. I have an idea as to why she uses the baseline form so much in comparison to the others, but I'll get into that in a minute. But while the fight was cool, there wasn't too much to go about it. And then she ended up almost losing. She had to rely on taking over Sayla's powers towards the end of the fight and force Elfman to finish the fight. And then she didn't absorb Sayla until the end of Tartaros, after Kyoka lost to Urza and Minerva and everything. And so that was how she got the Sayla form she uses right now. So to a degree, she didn't even beat Sayla fully herself. And she had to basically take her over when her guard was down. So that was kind of a shame. With how that was handled, it just feels like she was undermined in that instance, since that was her fight, and that was technically her win. I feel like we should have gotten that instance right after the fight, if anything. Though I do know that with the tail in the Tartarus, she absorbs power from it to get a brand new takeover form, but that's besides the point. Tartarus was an arc about demons. We had a character whose whole gimmick was around demons. Yet, outside of a few instances in one actual fight, she did not have much of a spotlight or mega impact on the progression of the arc, besides making Sayla feel humiliated and have her have to go off somewhere else. Which is kind of something that I feel like the anime could have changed, because in the manga, Grey was the one to take out Tempester and get the blood to help Loxus and the Thunder Legion recover. But in the anime, it's Loxus that beats Tempester as a sense of redemption to kind of take out the guy that killed so many people, as well as currently killing his friends. And he's doing this all while his guts are basically starting to liquefy from the virus, fighting on the brink of death, which is a really, really cool character-defining moment for Loxus. And I feel like an arc with demons should have really had a lot more focus on Mira and have that be a massive character moment for her in this arc. But instead it was more so, I guess Elfman had more of a focus than her to a degree, which is kind of a shame. I don't have a problem with Gray getting development this arc. He's connected to Zeref through De Liora, and thus we had a bit more development with him. He became a Devil Slayer. It all became really cool, and it panned out towards the end of the series. But then comes the final arc, and what does Mira do in Alvarez? She fights Wall's weakness clones for a gag, then wins by having the smart idea, when they all have the smart idea to fight the other person's weakness to win. Then when she ends up actually having a pretty interesting fight, she fights the two tagalongs, I'm going to call them, I forgot their names, Irene's essential companions, as when she sees that they're pretty tough, she unleashes her new takeover form, Allegria. At that point, I'd say it's her strongest form. Literally unleashing it, she evaporated a chunk of the ocean at the beach shore. And she managed to one-shot both of them, showcasing how strong she is. But then she gets out of it, as that does take up a good chunk of magic power. Then Irene shows up, injures Mira, almost kills her, if it wasn't for Brandish shrinking the wound to save her life. And then she was basically doing nothing for the rest of the arc until she had a off-screen fight with Jacob, where she managed to deal a finishing blow after a prolonged fight. And that was it for Mira in the final arc. She didn't have any big character-defining moments. She had an interesting fight with Irene's, underlings, but didn't amount to much, unleashing a new form, one-shotting them, but then immediately humiliated by Irene. Didn't do too much in terms of confidence with her character. I feel like we could have given her something else in that arc. Heck, it would have been awesome if she fought Bloodman to kind of give her another battle against a different demon. And that's all we got from Mira in the mainline series. Then 100 Years Quest rolled around. And in the Alderaan arc, she was brainwashed along with the rest of the guild to fight Team Natsu and Diablos. And all her fights were more or less off-screen. She was starting to fight Lucy along with her siblings. Lucy unleashes a big attack with a new form, does nothing. I guess shows just how strong they've gotten since the end of Alvarez. Cool. She has an off-screen fight with Scullion and Mad Mole alongside Elfman. Okay, they survived against Mira and them for a good chunk of time. That's decent. Could we see more of the fight? No, the escape, and then Gray kind of beats her off-screen for a gag. Nothing much with Mira there. She's not around until more recently in the manga, so spoilers up to the current chapter, which at the point of this recording is 196. She, for a good chunk of time, was fighting a demon off-screen. Another arc where there's a group of antagonists with demons as the theme. And Mira was fighting one, mostly in her base form until she used Satan Soul. Then, after a bit of time, switched over to Sayla, but at the end of the fight, after getting knocked down for a bit, she managed to take over a bit of her power, and thus turn into Allegria, use that as fuel, and basically beat this demon with one massive blow. Cool. That fight was mostly off-screen, poorly paced, and we didn't get to see much development from Mira at all. Hunter's Quest is mostly a lot of cool moments and fights, with some character moments for specific characters, but we don't get anything from Mira. And that's kind of it. Mira had a lot of scattered stuff in the series, and unfortunately, she has not had any massive character-defining moments since Tenrou Island. She's had small glimpses in like Key to the Starry Heavens, like I mentioned, and we got teases of that, thanks to her backstory, in Tartaros, but that arc never really focused on her after that point, and she was kind of undermined with how it had to be ended, and she was stuck with one form for the entire time. Now, I have an idea as to why Mira tends to stick with the baseline Satan Soul form, or fights in her base form for a majority of a fight like she did in a more recent one in 100 Years Quest. It takes up a lot of magic power. Obviously, she was out of the game for a while, and thus using this takeover magic would definitely eat away at her magic reserves. So, in order to compensate, she tends to go into these forms when needed, and it's safe to say that her baseline Satan Soul form doesn't take up as much magic power when she's using it for a prolonged period of time as her other forms like, obviously, Allegria or Citri. Those forms are her strongest forms and thus most likely take up a lot of magic power and she can't maintain them for too long, so I get it. But I really feel like we could have dealt with more creative ways to get around this issue and at least show more instances of her fights, while showing the more two-sided nature of her personality, the jovial, supportive character, with the glimpses of the she-devil and her bad temper when she's pushed to the brink, even in her base state, to show that side of her personality. Mira hasn't developed since Tenrou. She's basically been a stagnant character for a long time. Tartaros started to push more towards Mira embracing more of her demon side, but nothing else really happened with that, and even in the final arc, there wasn't much done with her as a character, and that's why in the fanbase, she is deemed as a very underutilized character, someone who is incredibly strong, has a good personality and good backstory with decent to good writing, but has been constantly sidelined, more so than some other characters, even newer characters that haven't been there for a long time. Kana had less screen time than Mira at the beginning of the series, up until Tenrou Island, and less relevance in the plot up until Tenrou Island, where she became a prominent main character in one of the main groups of the series, and she has had more standout moments and character-defining moments and build-up and growth than Mira. Now, Mira being basically roughly in the same place to a degree could make sense for a flat character arc to a degree, but I feel like coming face to face with the traumas of her past, reliving some instances, and thus fighting a literal demons that were forcing her siblings to almost kill each other, I feel like we could have done a lot more with that, with the emotional turmoil and growth of her character. But hey, 100 Years Quest is still going. Maybe Mira will get something else going forward. I can only hope. This ended up being a long discussion video where I go through each of the arcs with Mira's prominence. I'm sorry this ended up being so long, but there were just a lot of things I had to talk about when it came to Mira after the most recent chapter that I really needed to dig into. But what do you guys think? Am I being unfair? Am I not digging deep enough? Is Mira fine as she is, or does she deserve more and as she is underutilized? Let me know in the comment section down below, as well as if I've missed any specific moments or instances of her character that helped define her more that I missed. Let me know, and what other characters would you like me to just do a basic discussion like this for in the future? Let me know. And once more, if you haven't already, like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for updates on future videos. Really helps, and it shows you guys enjoy the content I make here on the channel and shows you want to see more. With all that said and done, hope you all have an awesome day.